Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Accommodation Show. This week, I am joined by the legendary Steve Trover from Better Talent. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Bart. Really appreciate you having me on.
I've been looking forward to this. I recently just saw you at VRMA. I first encountered you over a year ago through Mr. Brooke Faust, and then we had a quick chat. What was it? Maybe about 30 seconds. Said, "Hey, we need to connect, and we need to get you on the show to talk about talent acquisition, how we find the right people for our STR business."
Absolutely, that's what we do.
Yeah, brilliant. And so, look, I'll read everyone your bio because I think it's super important. So, Steve Trover is a 27-year vacation rental industry veteran, having founded and led 4 vacation rental management companies, designed and developed and built hundreds of vacation homes. Designed proprietary property management software, and has emerged as a leading voice and a technology strategist within the industry. And this part I didn't know. You're the former president of VRMA and vice president over a 5-year period. So you've been in the industry for a little while. So you've been doing a lot of volunteering. You really understand the industry deeply. And now you are the CEO of Better Talent. So you guys are helping with acquiring talent for short-term rental, but also, we just talked about it, also hotel companies as well. So, folks, Steve's got a massive amount of experience, and I want to kind of officially welcome you to the show.
Well, thank you so much. Definitely happy to be here.
I was really excited to read your bio. I understand what it's like to be part of a volunteer organization like VRMA, and the experience that you actually get from it, and all the different stakeholders. Tell me, how long ago were you the president of VRMA, and how did you fall into that?
Yeah, I started the industry 27 years ago, and really shortly thereafter started getting involved in the local associations here in the Central Florida market, Orlando area where Disney is, and then kind of growing into the state level, and then ultimately at VRMA. And I spent 5 years, 3 years as vice president, 2 years as president, about almost 10 years ago now. So it's quite a while ago. During my tenure, we took the association into Europe, had the very first meeting in Rome, and kind of spread it there, and then really grew it here in the U.S. as well. And I think one of the things that I really got out of it, other than just giving back and really enjoying giving back to the industry, was getting a very macro view of the industry, not just here in the U.S., but going into Europe and looking at the industry from a global perspective. I think that really helped me to understand it better.
It's interesting that, because if we think about the industry as a whole, it seems to have been going at different paces depending on what continent you're in. And now, as we do more of these events, particularly after COVID, that you've got a lot of podcasts, a lot of information and content, and companies now working all over the world. I feel that there's hyper-local differences, but as an industry, we're starting to consolidate.
Would 100% agree with that, and I think COVID really accelerated that. It was happening to some degree prior, but everybody just doing more podcasts like this one, and just having more information shared across the world has helped kind of, I don't want to say even the playing field, but level up everybody to that similar scenario. So, and I, I'll tell you, I took VRMA into Europe because I knew Europeans had been doing it much longer than Americans, and I thought we could learn something, and we certainly did. So, but this has really been accelerated in recent times, which is great to see.
I want to just quickly, before we move on to the talent and the acquisition and maybe a bit more about your history, I just want to kind of close this one off, because this is one of the things that I think that if you're a property manager, or if you're a host and you've never been to an event or a conference, you just don't know what you're missing out on. And literally yesterday I was talking to someone that I met at a conference here in Australia, and they were just saying, wow, all of the decisions that we were going to make for our business, now we can approach them with a lot more confidence. We've had a chat with a few other hosts, and we're like, okay, cool, we're going down the right path. And they literally went and actually, in this particular circumstance, I'm not going to say who it is, but they I guess, decided to make some decisions around employment and some big decisions in terms of that. So their company has changed dramatically and decided to work locally rather than remotely with their staff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a huge push for remote, which we like to see. It definitely allows you to open up the talent pool significantly, especially given that most STR VR companies, if they're not urban anyways, they're in destinations where they're frankly have a talent puddle, not a talent pool. But in more recent times, we're seeing a lot of people kind of push back against that and pull back in to the office. Not everybody, but there certainly is a big pull, and you're seeing that in the news more on a macro scale across all businesses. But we're certainly seeing some of that in the vacation rental space as well, in short-term rentals.
But if we rewind just a tiny bit, the one part I want to ask you about is that collaboration and networking, because you've been doing it for probably longer than anybody else, and you've been leading the way with VRMA back 10 years ago. How important is it for someone that's in the industry to get involved?
I implore every single person listening to this, if you have not been to some type of STR vacation rental conference, go. You will not regret it. It will change your world in the business world anyways. And the best part of the conference is not the content. It's not all the vendors that show up in the vendor showcase. It's the networking. And every time I have gone, and I've been going for over 25 years to vacation rental management conferences and STR conferences, and I can just tell you that I learn every single time, and I usually learn by conversations at the bar or in the hallway more than I ever learn from the content. The content is great. There's really strong content. You will learn that way. You'll meet phenomenal vendors of products that maybe you kind of saw, out on the internet or whatever, but didn't really get a chance to dig in and really meet the people. And this allows you to do that. But man, the networking piece is just critical. And I've got friends all over this world because of this industry and these industry events that help propel me in all businesses that I've started. And I think it's the best thing you do in this industry is from an educational perspective is just to go out there and meet everybody else.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, that's why I turn up. So I travel all the way from Australia to come over to VRMA because it is the biggest conference out there, and it's the best way for me to engage with our audience, which is primarily in the USA. And it's really incredible to see it grow and to evolve and to change and to also get varying perspectives. I think that's really refreshing as well. Quite often you can be in your own echo chamber of thoughts and feelings about something, and then you go and you see, oh, hold on, people are doing it completely differently to what I thought. I think even some people that get involved in the industry, they only know about arbitrage, and then they go, oh, actually I could become a property manager, and then there's a whole different world that sits behind that. But what I want to do is quickly just go through your history. You said that you ran a few property management companies. You've actually managed to sell out of different companies along the way, which is incredible. And now you've gone to talent acquisition. Just tell me that journey at the start. That sort of what were you doing?
Yeah, so I've started 15 companies over the last 33 years, and the first few companies had nothing to do with STR. But in 1997, I founded a company here in the Orlando area near Disney to do management, and we marketed properties for other property managers. And then we started to manage homes, grew that inventory pretty significantly over the course of several years, and then built that company over a 2-decade period, so for 20 years, into 4 different destinations. We were here in Orlando. We were in Captiva Island, Florida, which is about 3 hours southwest of Orlando, Sun Valley, Idaho, which is out western United States, and then San Diego, California. I acquired a company there. And so grew that to 400 properties under management, had 100 employees, also had a real estate company that was focused on STRs, an interior design company. We furnished over 500 STRs through that company. And then I had a development company called Purpose-Built Vacation Homes, and we would design, spec, and build purpose-built vacation homes. And we had architectural and engineering in-house and developed out those properties. And so Did that early on. Could not find a good PMS platform. There was almost no web-based platforms in existence. So designed a proprietary system that stayed proprietary for many years. That ultimately became a company called LiveRes, and I was the chief strategy officer of that company for several years and a shareholder. It now is owned by private equity, and so involved in the technology side there, just kind of developing out all the needs that we had for that group of companies, but specifically, obviously, the management company being the focus. And sold all of that about 7 years ago. Got into consulting, and I consulted for tiny startups all the way to Goldman Sachs and in between, just trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. One of the first things I got asked to do as a consultant was recruit, and I was just doing really exec search, kind of the traditional way of recruiting. Didn't really feel like that was something I wanted to do, and I really didn't think the industry would pay traditional recruiting fees, and so came up with a different business model and launched Better Talent about 3.5 years ago now, and now we work with almost 250 clients across the country and some international as well. So,
wow,
that's where we're
what a journey, hey? So a company every 2 years. I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, that's a really common theme. I've got one question about that before I move into all the talent stuff, and I kind of feel that I'm holding the audience back. But I do want to ask this. One thing that you did back then was you clearly were setting up different companies, which then in theory you can then sell individually, or they can kind of operate within their own structures. One of the most common questions that I get asked as a property management company, then the first company that always pops up is the cleaning business. So especially when you get to scale, then you got the cleaners. And what do we do? Do we keep them together, or do we split them out as a separate company?
Yeah, I mean, in our case, we didn't start a separate cleaning company, and we did a lot of other things like that. For example, we had, I think, 5 or 6 full-time pool technicians because we had so many pools. We painted so much that we had 3 painters. We had pressure cleaners constantly doing that. So each one of those were business units that we didn't separate out, and then others like interior design, development, the real estate firm we did separate out. So I think it just depends on, how much of that business you want to be separate, and is there an opportunity to sell off that business unit at some point. Frankly, if I had to do it all over again, I would probably do less companies. Right now I own one for probably the first time in most of my career, and I kind of like that because every time you start a new business, even if it is vertically integrated, it's a separate mouth to feed, it's a separate entity, it's separate tax returns and all of the things that go along with that. And a lot of people, will talk themselves into saying, hey, it's vertically integrated with what we're doing, and so it's okay. No, it's another business. It's a significant undertaking, and you need to treat it like that and think of it like that, or you might get in trouble with it. And so, if I look back, one of the mistakes I would say is I spread too far out in that regard. I would keep it more centralized. Now, that said, there are certain businesses like the real estate business. I think it's good to keep that separate from the vacation rental or short-term rental business from a legal perspective in most cases. Some states don't allow it. You have to have it as one. I happen to be, most of my business was done here in Florida, and you can keep it separate. So.
Yeah, right. No, that's a terrific insight. It is one of those common questions that I get all the time, and I think that people get super overwhelmed with exactly how to structure things, and that kind of leads really well into where we're going to go with this, and that is figuring out how to scale and how to find the right staff and what heads to place when we are scaling. And I guess even company structure leads into exactly what we're talking about. Do you get a new head for that department, or do you get it centrally managed by one manager, by a COO? Do you get a CEO to replace you? Do you get a marketing team? Do you get BDMs? Do you get a cleaning manager? There's just so many different roles that we're trying to add, and we're trying to scale this business. And I think for a lot of people, the hardest thing is to know the first maybe 3 to 5 people to hire. Would you agree?
I would agree. And if you think about it, when I had 100 employees, if I had one mishire, one bad placement, not an ideal candidate for a role, it was 1% of my company. When I had 3, it was 1/3 of my company. And so when you think about it in that context, those early stage ones, not only figuring it out, but making sure you get the right person is so critical. One of the ways that, when we're looking at it, if I'm talking to somebody that's got, say, 10 or 12 properties and they're doing everything themselves, and we're trying to figure out who that first person we're going to hire, I actually have them build the org chart. We do that for them. And I would recommend anybody listening, just take a piece of paper, go out, create a Word doc or an Excel, and build yourself an organizational chart. And you're laughing going, but it's just me. Well, yeah, but you're doing all the things. And so you're doing housekeeping and maintenance and guest services and guest relations and reservations and accounting and business development and all of those different components of the business. You should build out that organizational chart, put your name on every one of those boxes, and then look at that objectively and say, okay, which of those do I like to do the least and which am I the worst at? And that's probably where you should focus your first hire at, right? So you could take those hats off. You mentioned I have a hat collection behind me and a hat rack here. And that it kind of reminds me of what this business is like, is early stage, you wear a lot of hats. And the key is taking the right hat off at the right time as you do scale. But really, it's those things that you don't like to do. The other thing I would add to that is, what is the best and highest use of your time? Generally speaking, that's what you like to do. But if you really like housekeeping, but business development is where we grow the inventory, probably you should still focus on biz dev. So it's a combination of what you like to do, what you're good at, and what drives the business forward. In my case, I, as quickly as possible, built an organization so that I could focus on really the growth components, whether that be marketing for rentals, marketing to get more inventory, or actually selling to get more inventory. Those were all things that I was good at and I like to do, but they also drove the business. So I needed to get pretty quickly the operational components of the business off my plate so I could be able to do that. And I see that a lot. The best salesperson in a vacation rental or short-term rental company is generally the founder, no matter what your personality is like, because the homeowners want to talk to the owner of the company, right? And so getting out of the weeds of operations quickly allows you to kind of propel forward. So, but that mapping out of and realizing and recognizing you wear all the hats and then thinking about which one you want to take off is what I generally tell people to do early stage.
Yeah, okay, great. And look, I think through everything you just said, there was probably about 15 different questions that I had, so I'm going to have to remember all of them. But I kind of want to go back to organizational chart, because I think that conceptually for people that's going to be a challenge. And I know that you said that, I just think of all the different things that you do, and how do we know that whether it's an actual job, and how do we say, okay, well, we don't like to do those things. How can we actually know whether someone else is going to be good enough to do it? Oh, I'm conflating this question. I'm going to go back a little bit. Sure. How do we know that we can afford to pass over those tasks to somebody, and at what stage we're actually going to do it? Because you said maybe you're at 10 or 12 properties. That's when you might start to look at it. How do we figure out whether we can afford it, and then within the organization, what those different chunks are? Do you have a template, for example?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge I think in this industry, and you know this well, Bart, is that there's so many variations of business models, types of product. I mean, the different variables are just endless. And so even when I say 10 to 12 units, I mean, you might have 5 really high-end beachfront properties in a destination that are generating hundreds of thousands of dollars each, and you can afford to hire earlier in a company like that than, say, somebody that has 31 bedroom condos somewhere. So it's really not unit count. It really comes down to math, right? And how much margin your company is producing, and can it feed having an employee starting to do those things. And the question is, you got to look at the P&L. You got to look at the math. You got to know your financials well enough to understand whether you can afford it. The other thing I would say with that, when I was considering hiring my first executive assistant, first time I ever had one, this was a long, long time ago, and I was talking to a mentor, and I asked him, "You think I can afford one right now?" And he had the financials and all that. And he said, well, let me tell you this, you won't be able to afford this person until you have them. And what he meant by that is he saw me doing all these things that frankly were not below me, because I will mop the floors as necessary, but they were things that weren't best and highest use of my time. They weren't those growth components. And if I got somebody to do those things, it opens up my ability to go and produce more to help afford. An example would be if you're out managing properties, or you're out running out to do errands in a property, and you miss a call from a potential homeowner and you don't close that deal, all of that stuff that you're doing probably for many months is lost relative to the revenue that you could generate from that one property. And so that's an example of what I like to look at. And I talk to people all the time where they're in that scenario. They're running around with their head cut off, trying to get all the things done because they can't afford to hire somebody. But the reality is if they did, they could. So it's a tough thing to kind of take that initial leap. I recognize that. It's been a lot of years since I've had to do that myself, but I talk to people every day and we kind of talk through that. And you just got to really know your financials and know what you can afford, and then kind of project. And hey, having a business is risk. You have to take a risk, but you can take a calculated one with this if you know your numbers and know what you can produce if you get some of those things off your plate.
And do you divide those sort of roles between sort of a growth metric and a service metric? And by that I mean, if we're hiring people to service the clients that we have already, then we can see how much money we've got in that pot, how much revenue we're bringing in, and then we go, well, there's a cost associated with that. So, or the cleanings, the cleaning manager, the VA that's dealing with, or the customer support side of it, and that's for your current revenue. But then growth is a little bit different, because then that's when you're placing a potential BDM, salesperson, and team around that, marketing as well, and that is your opportunity, right? So you're not going to get. It's not a cost. It's a cost sort of for growth rather than a cost for operations, right? Do you separate those out?
Yeah, I think so. In the sense that operations is easy math. BDR or having somebody growing, it's kind of it's a leap, right? You can kind of project what you think you might do, but you don't know until it happens, right? And so, I always encourage every founder to get into that growth seat and stay there for a period of time, because again, the best person to grow it is the founder. That's who the homeowner wants to talk to. They don't want to talk to a salesperson initially. And as I grew, I had salespeople on my team. I still met every potential homeowner even later on in the game. So it's something that you're probably going to be a part of or doing throughout your career, running one of these types of operations. And so that's a very costly, and it's the hardest thing to kind of take that risk on. Whereas operations, you can really look at it from the current construct, the current P&L and what it's producing, and pretty much understand whether you can afford somebody in ops or not, right? And then that lets you be the one to go out and do those sales. Now, if you're just not sales driven at all, meaning you just do not like that and you feel like you're stuck and you're not growing inventory, that's a different scenario. And there's even opportunities in this industry to outsource some of the sales efforts to companies, so that you don't even have to have a full-time employee initially. You would think as a recruiter, I always want everybody to hire full-time. I don't actually. Sometimes it makes sense to work with a consultant or a third-party company initially until you get to a certain scale. And there are opportunities to do that more today than there ever was before. And so if you're not sales, that's okay. That there's options there. But in most cases, most of the founders are frankly the personality traits that work really well in a sales role.
Gotcha. So if we go back to organizational chart, which I could probably keep it going back to, what is your best advice for somebody who, let's assume they've got the 10, 20 properties. Mm-hmm. They might even have 50 or 100 and they still haven't done their organizational chart. They've got a few customer service people. They don't have a BDM because they've been doing it themselves.
Right.
In terms of the planning, in terms of that day, those hours, or the once a month check-in, what is the best advice that you have? Because you've done this all before, and you can actually look back in hindsight now, and you can think, oh, like if I could do it all again,
Yep.
this is how I would do it. What would be your best advice to someone in terms of sitting down, making their organizational chart as well as their business plan as a whole, and you need the numbers to sit behind it, to make sure that they're to take that moment, and what are they doing during that moment to make sure that they've got a plan?
Yeah, really thinking through the different components of the business and laying those out. And when you hear an organizational chart, maybe it sounds complex, but it's really just a group of boxes. You're the founder, you're up here, everything below it, and that's generally speaking in an STR business. There's housekeeping, there's maintenance, there's guest communications, there's finance, there's business development. So there's all of these regular boxes that you would have in any one of these companies. I don't care if you have 3 properties, you're still doing all those things. And so laying those out. As far as what would I do if I went back, and frankly, I could tell you what one of my biggest mistakes is I stayed in the general manager seat far too long. And there's a book I highly recommend everybody read. It's called Rocket Fuel. It's a sister book to the book Traction, both by an author named Gino Wickman. And Rocket Fuel speaks to the visionary, which is generally the founder of that company, and the integrator. And an integrator in a STR company is generally that general manager, not the founder. And the founder, a lot of times we stay in that seat far too long, and we operate, the day-to-day operations, and we handle all the marketing and finance, and we have all of these different direct reports, whether those are just boxes and you're doing them all or not. But if I were to go back, I would hire that person, that integrator, probably an ops manager at the early stage of the company, really fast. That'd be my first person that I would go out and hire and have them manage all of the vendors, all of the different components of operational, and then I would focus on growth as that visionary CEO. There's no question that I would do that if I started all over again. I literally waited till almost 10 years in to get my first general manager, which was crazy.
So what we're saying, this isn't necessarily a monthly task. So you got your strategic planning for your business, that's something you want to check in at least every quarter. This is hey guys, get off this. Once you finish listening to this episode, find an hour, do your organizational chart, so at least you start to mind map it, and you start to figure it out. Do a bit of research online as to what you might want it to look like. Use ChatGPT or AI to help you if Steve isn't available or you can't afford him, and then off you go, right?
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times I get on an initial call with the client before they're a client, and I ask that question, do you have an order? And probably 8 times out of 10 they do not.
Yeah.
10 times out of 10 if they're early stage, they almost look at me sideways. Why would I need an organizational chart? I only have 2 people or 3 people. And then I explain it. Once I explain it and I show it to them, they get it, they make sense, and they go and do it. And it's not rocket science. Absolutely, we help people do it all the time. You can do this on your own. This is just a tip that I would recommend everybody do. I did do that fairly early on. I didn't think on it in the context that I described earlier, where I thought about what do I like to do the least. I waited way too long to do that. So I preach this pretty much every day, that you got to have one, and you really should think about that. And yeah, early stage, maybe even more than quarterly, quite frankly. It seems like you wouldn't, but things go pretty quickly, especially if you're growing quickly in one of these companies. And so constantly kind of revisiting that, thinking about it, and shaping the company around it. And since I've been doing this with Better Talent and meeting with them, I can tell you I've got dozens of clients that did this early stage, and it really helped them shape the business in a different way than had they not done it, right? So,
yeah. And okay, good. So look, amazing, and I think I've got to go back and relook at my organizational chart. It's funny, when I first started the business, one of the first things I did is I had my numbers. Like within 2 or 3 weeks, I started to figure out what my price point would be, what my numbers need to be, how many phone calls I might need to make to convert X amount to generate the business that I need. And that was all done at the very start. Then I'll look at it every 3 months, and then I start looking at it every year. So it's one of those ones where I know I need to go back and sort of potentially put back into my to-do list, if that makes sense, rather than just being busy in the business, which is what you were talking about before. The executive assistant, the VA, that person sort of helping at the very start, but generally they'll be sort of the customer service side, taking a lot of that burden off of you. It'll be the person who will also do the listings and sort of really help operationally to get you going. I would say that most companies, most short-term rental companies, would start off with that particular hire. Any kind of preference for you, whether it's I'd love you to approach this without bias towards better talent, if you don't mind. VA need someone to be local. What can we do both? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to what you want to take off your plate. If you want to take off all of those things that can be done remotely, VAs are phenomenal for that, right? So, and that's guest communication, some of the things that you talked about. If running out to properties and actually doing operational components is something, obviously that won't work with a VA. And so a lot of companies, start with a VA, and then the owner or the founder is out there running around and driving. I will tell you this, it's more efficient to do some things behind the desk, even though I like to be out in the field too, than going out in the field. So, and this is not a better talent thing versus VA. I mean, we have VAs, we work with them ourselves. I think they're great. I have no problem. We help place direct hire VAs. We work with Extent Team, and we encourage people to use VAs as part of their what we call people stack, by the way, which is what we coined the phrase around the organizational chart. But it really comes down to the individual and what you want to get off your plate first, on whether it's a VA or it's a boots on the ground person. It's really what it comes down to. So,
yeah. One good one that I heard recently was with finding that operational person. Quite often when you're interviewing cleaners, sometimes the cleaner is not just a cleaner, and then you realize that you found your gem that can help you with those boots on the ground. So we get a bit of help with our support. We look at the tasks that we don't really want to do or that we're not so good at and would prefer to get some help with, so that frees up our time to focus on the things that we are good at. And one of the recommendations that I'm hearing through this is make sure that growth is probably, no matter what, it's one of the drivers of the business to make sure that it does grow. So then you can, that's the point of running a business, is to create some wealth. Unless you just want to sustain yourself, which is okay as well. Get to 30 properties and get to where you need to be. I think it kind of leads next into, and you tell me whether I'm going the right way. We're now getting bigger, and now we're having to think about culture and really finding the right fit. And I think that you'll also probably argue that first hire is probably the most important one in terms of right cultural fit. So what do we need to start to think about?
Yeah, I think that the way that you develop culture in a company is first decide what your core values are as a company. And, we have listed core values. If you don't have that now, I recommend doing that. You mentioned earlier using ChatGPT or Google. You can go find lots and lots of examples of what core values look like. And the reason why I feel that's important is that we hire, we fire, we grow our company, we make all decisions filtered through those core values. And that becomes our culture. And so at Better Talent, even, that's exactly how we literally have them in the next room, all around the office in big letters, what our core values are, just as a reminder every single day, all day, of what those are and how we filter our decisions. So I highly recommend that. And then thinking about it in a more granular, from a more granular perspective on, do you want this to be a fun culture, hyper professional? What is your go to market to owners and guests, and how can you incorporate that into the culture as a company, and kind of design what that culture looks like? And I admire a company that was founded years and years ago called Zappos, which is a shoe company. Amazon acquired them ultimately. But I went and kind of read the book on Zappos, and then went and toured and met the founder. And they just had this amazing culture around happiness. And so you can decide what those keywords are, what those kind of core values are, and build that culture around it. And one of our core values is integrity. We always operate with integrity. Another is always bring value. We're constantly looking for ways, even outside of our core offering, on how we can bring value for clients. And I had those listed when I had the short-term rental company, and obviously it was very guest and owner centric in what we were looking at there. And so that, once you have those, you can create a foundation, and you can build and identify and hire people around those core values and make sure they align with what you're trying to build as a culture. And so we encourage clients to do that every single day.
Yeah, that makes sense. We're running out of time.
Uh-oh.
Again, we are running out of time, so I might quick fire this, just a couple of short questions. The one that we kind of just started on before we started recording was about finding the right talent. Right now, the talent pool, it's tricky to find the right people. Demographically, everything has changed. So we used to have a much younger workforce. Now everyone's a lot more educated. Mm-hmm. So the education levels have gone up. As the education levels have gone up, demands have gone up as well. If you're hiring someone that's younger, they're going to want the world, and they're entitled to it, because you know what? It's very it's competitive as an employer to find the right people. Mm-hmm. So challenging to find the right people. Obviously, you guys help bridge that gap. Why would we use someone like Better Talent rather than just kind of trying to find someone ourselves?
Well, much like you could do all the marketing in-house, or you can work with Bart, right? There's so many things that you have to do well inside of a short-term rental company. If you think about it, it's one of the most complex and challenging businesses to run that there is, because you have to do all of those things that I mentioned before: marketing, accounting, business development, operations, and all those. And those are all individual business units. One of the most important things, if not the most important thing in my view, obviously somewhat self-serving sounding, but it's why I do what I do. If we hire the right people for each one of those things, this is a fun business to own. If we don't, it's not. And so we focus on that. Why would you use us? It's because we're going to get more broader in our reach, and whether that's our 180,000 people we've got in our database, or the way that we go to market in so many different channels, or the fact that we outbound source to go get applicants. These are things, and I could list many others, that frankly a typical short-term rental operator, or any short-term rental operator, doesn't have time to do themselves. And yet it is the single most important thing to get that right person in that right seat. And so we built the company to help my favorite people in the world, which is short-term rental operators, because they're some of the hardest working individuals I've ever met. And so because I knew I didn't do it as well as I could when I owned one, right? I learned some things along the way, School of Hard Knocks, on how to hire, and we've incorporated that and all the learnings that we've had since. But I just didn't have time to do it well. And frankly, even if you have somebody in HR, as you scale, usually that person can't be all things of HR. Sure. And so we come in and we partner with clients to help identify and hire the best person, help them with the structure. You can do all the things that we do yourself, including personality testing and all this stuff, but it takes time, right? And so we're trying to make sure that we can do that at scale for all of our clients, so that they can get the right people and enjoy owning the business instead of the business owning them.
Yeah, and a great way to kind of bridge that gap as well, if you don't have an HR person yet, or even if you do have an HR person that's getting a bit overwhelmed, one of the most common pieces of feedback that I ever get when talking to companies as they scale, once they get to sort of like that 10, 20 employees, at some point they do that HR person. And as soon as they got the HR person, like, oh my God, I wish we'd done that way sooner, because it's just so complicated and so difficult. So I can completely appreciate where you guys fit. But folks, if you want to learn more about Better Talent, then it would be bettertalent.com, I assume.
Absolutely.
So jump onto there. And how else can people reach out to you and engage with you?
You can shoot me an email at steve@bettertalent.com. You can connect to me on LinkedIn. If you book a demo, in most cases on our website, you're going to get me. I actually meet with every client right now, right at the very beginning, listening to the pain points that shape the business around it. And if you do that, I bring value, whether you end up working with us or not. So I just try to help in that conversation, show you what we do, obviously, but whether or not we work together or not, I just want to help. And that's kind of that's one of our core values, and that's how we kind of roll. So.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you so much for your time. I regret not doing this episode last year. I really do. I can't believe that it took this long for our paths to cross in this way. And I'm looking forward to seeing your growth as Better Talent, and see what you guys get up to. And also, please make sure that you are sharing resources, books, and all that kind of stuff with the community, so that we can download those and get ourselves educated, because I know that you'll have a lot to share with everybody, and I'd be keen to read it myself and our community as well. So Steve, you're awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Hey, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it, Bart.
Take care.